Hi! This time I wanted to share some thoughts on unbalanced encounters. This video is inspired by a question made by one of my viewers by the name of Cyclone. Cyclone was watching one of the parts of my guide slash review featuring the solo adventuring toolkit. If you haven't seen that guide or review, please check out the playlist in the description below. He had a question concerning when you obtained some results that were too difficult when it comes to combat encounters. There is an easy section of an encounter table where you obtain results that are somewhat suitable for characters between levels 1 to 4 of experience, but you can also get some difficult results, like, for example, a heal giant. And so he was asking how I would handle that situation. So I gave him some tips, like, well, if you don't like the result, you can re-roll it, or maybe you can use the quadded difficulty adjustments that also come in the toolkit to lower the difficulty of the enemy. So I gave him some general tips. You could also replace that table with your own table. It's just an example of how you can use things, but my favorite solution is that you could take on that giant even though it is much more powerful than your party of adventurers or your single adventurer. However, this doesn't mean that you need to fight the giant. Maybe you want to sneak past that room, or maybe, yes, like perhaps the giant is sleeping and you make your check to see if you manage to sneak by or move silently. Maybe you actually decide to try to trick the giant. You bring out the bard or the mountebank, it depends on the system that you are playing, and you try to trick the giant in some way in letting you pass. Maybe the giant is going to ask something so that it allows you through that room or corridor. So it can be handled in different ways. But in this video, like I said, I want to focus on unbalanced encounters and how they are so fun and they present many opportunities when it comes to role-playing games. I think it would be a good approach or start for this video to think as to why it suddenly became such a popular tendency to balance things out. It's quite interesting because if you take a look at older, like those old TSR adventures, those modules, and of many other companies, especially those that present a sandbox sort of situation, many of the encounters could result in unbalanced situations where the non-player characters or enemies are much more powerful when compared to the party of adventurers. And this is all an opportunity for different roleplay scenarios. Like I said, you could, depending on the system, you could come up with some interesting solutions related to running away or sneaking by. With some intelligent solutions, you could actually win some battles where all the odds are against you. Even if the enemy is quite strong, maybe you can somehow modify the situation through trickery so that enemy is defeated in some way. So maybe it's a very dumb but strong enemy. You could try to outsmart that enemy to perhaps convince that monster, creature, or whatever to walk into a certain area that you already know has been trapped in some way. Maybe you entered a previous room where there was this deadly trap and you didn't even want to step into that room because it was somewhat obvious. And that's why it's sometimes convenient that if the rogue or thief or whatever detects a trap, sometimes it's better not to try to disarm it and you try to trick someone into stepping into that room. And you have many examples of similar situations when it comes to those sword and sorcery novels, or even some science fantasy old stories and books. So look to the examples presented in The Dying Earth, Conan the Barbarian, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. Even some stories from Clark Ashton Smith. There is one story, I'm going to avoid spoilers, but in one story you have two characters, let's put it like that, two characters that aren't exactly very capable. Well, they are probably somewhat skilled in their roguish activities, But when it comes to yes, combat capability and knowledge, they are quite lacking. So they go into a very dangerous site. Like I said, there are many things that need to be avoided because they will spoil the entire story. But they go into this very dangerous site and they encounter such an abomination. I think that Conan would have a very difficult time to actually face off against that creature. He probably would have escaped the encounter. Conan usually, there are some times where he decides to run away. There are some very powerful demigod sort of creatures. Or maybe knowing Conan, sometimes he's quite resourceful and manages to find a particular weakness for an enemy or foe. But in the case of these poor scoundrels, only one of them made it out alive. And that is no spoiler. The story starts like this, with a character talking about how his partner didn't make it and he actually escaped, but he lost. It was a long time since I read that story. I don't remember if he lost the hand or the entire arm. And so, as you can see, that was an unbalanced encounter. These two protagonists went into this dangerous site. They rolled poorly in their encounter, and yes, they were attacked by this abomination. In that case, they handled things as a sort of chase, and one of them didn't make it. So those are some of the more exciting moments, in my opinion, when it comes to unexpected encounters. Sometimes they are just of a difficulty level that is just too high above the party level. And I think it's also because in real life we encounter many situations that are out of balance and unfair. So it's also a source of hope, I would say. There is always some way in which you can handle a particular situation. Sometimes you need to think outside the box, be quite flexible, have some adaptability as to your strategies and tactics in handling that situation. And there have been some cases, as I mentioned before, that you can actually eliminate the threat by tricking that enemy into some sort of trap or ploy. For example, when my players managed to overcome, even cause the death of a very powerful creature, perhaps 4 or 5 or more levels above them, I don't give them the full experience reward, because they didn't get to experience the entirety of that creature, of that encounter, but I still reward them quite well. It's, for example, maybe you are a martial artist, right? It's not going to be the same if you just approach an enemy and just, maybe the enemy is standing next to the ledge, a balcony or whatever on the fourth floor, and if you just push that guy off the balcony and kill him, it's not going to give you the same experience when it comes to combat when you actually have to face off against a martial artist of the same level, or a superior level, technically speaking, because you are going to learn a lot during that fight, because you need to save your life in that confrontation. That will be in a self-defense situation, let's put it like that. So in that case, like I said, there is still a chance to overcome those almost impossible to beat challenges. However, there are going to be many moments in which the enemy perhaps is quite smart. It's not easy to trick that enemy, and then you need to perhaps negotiate a little. Maybe you enter this like a cavern or great hall, and it turns out that there's a dragon there. So maybe you need to talk with the dragon and tell him something like, don't eat me, because if you eat me, you're only getting one snack, but I can bring some juicier treats for you. I know that there are a bunch of ogres down that way. Do you like ogre meat? No? Oh, well, don't worry. I also saw this other place, and they have like some giants, and they don't look as strong. Maybe if I can bring them to you, just let me pass or something. And maybe the dragon he asks for something in return, because how does that dragon know that you are not tricking it and you're just going to go on your way and not bringing anything back to it? Maybe the dragon is going to ask for something as a sort of like a reassurance, maybe he asks for your gold, or a member of the party. Maybe the dragon has some sort of, yes, a spell or ability or magical artifact, and he puts a guess effect on you, and now you are forced to carry out your promise or fulfill your promise of bringing a juicier treat. So it's all about that. As you can see, there are many opportunities to turn that unbalanced encounter into side quests, and you can obtain perhaps even some additional treasure and experience rewards. And there's also that tension that you do not know if the dragon is going to be true to his word. Maybe you actually bring like I said, some more succulent treats, or maybe the dragon actually asks you to retrieve some sort of magical item or artifact for it, or maybe the dragon is an enemy of another dragon or another faction, and he employs you as a sort of spy. You don't know if you actually manage to finish that job, if the dragon is going to let you live. So it's all an excuse for some side quests and further adventures. Yes, there are just many ways in which you can handle this if you're actually using um, the adventuring toolkit, the solo adventuring toolkit. There are some tables concerning quests and objectives and adventure frameworks that you could integrate into that particular unbalanced encounter. So yes, I sometimes find it very strange that everything has to be perfectly tailored for the group of adventurers. I'm not even sure when this tendency started. Perhaps they implemented it so it would be easier for beginner players to take on different encounters. Maybe a long time ago, the game designers of old were thinking, oh, the module writers, oh, if I release this module, everyone is going to die in that situation. We need to make things a bit more balanced. Because in my case, I really love those unbalanced encounters, and even in video games, like those old school video games that are very tough, like the first Might and Magic games, some games that are not that old but are still considered retro, like Dragon. If you haven't seen my video where I talk about the Dragon soundtrack, I'm going to put the link in the description below. Because yes, in the case of Might and Magic, sometimes you're moving through an area and you feel like, oh, well, this is an area level 1. There are only going to be very easy to defeat enemies, and suddenly this monster comes out of nowhere and annihilates the entire party just because you didn't want to run away. You have that moment to perceive the threat immediately when the monster injures one of the party members quite badly, or maybe he ends up killing a member of the party. So that's your signal to run away. In the case of Dragon, you are moving through this overland area and you want to avoid graves, because if you bump into one of those graves, this giant hellhound head is going to come out of the ground and it's going to kill you. You want to avoid looking at certain constellations in the night sky, because those constellations, some of them, if you look at them directly, they come alive and they descend from the heavens, quite Lovecraftian, like some sort of like a Migo or Migo. I think you pronounce them Amigo, right? The Migo, and they start to attack you. And so those moments are quite exciting. So yes, definitely consider that if you sometimes end up with a very difficult result concerning a combat encounter, it's an opportunity for further roleplay. You could handle it however you like. And because it's an encounter, you could make some rolls. If you're playing a solo, or maybe yes, if you're playing with other people or solo, you can always make some rolls to randomly determine if the creature is asleep or aware of your presence, or if it's distracted. So you can make some rolls to sneak by, or if the creature already saw you, maybe you want to handle it as a chase, or maybe you want to just talk things out to see if you come to an agreement. It's also possible, like I said, to adjust the difficulty in case you want to handle it like that. Because you could say, well, not all of the giants, not all of the ogres, not all of the dragons are going to be the same. They are not clones. They all have their different battle experiences. Some of them are injured or sick. Some of them are not well developed. For example, in the 13th Age core rulebook, there is there is an encounter with a very dangerous enemy, an enemy that player characters of lower level wouldn't be able to normally defeat, but because of the circumstances in that adventure, they can do it. They can actually defeat that enemy, but it's because that enemy went through a very specific situation. So the next time that you encountered a very powerful enemy, you could think that you could lower the difficulty if you like I said, a more balanced approach, and you could say, well, maybe that monster was injured from a previous battle, or that monster was cursed, or any sort of effect that nerfed or lowered the combat capabilities or the capacity of doing harm to the party of adventurers. So I hope this video was helpful or entertaining. And Cyclone, I hope these suggestions help you just like play the sort of encounters that you want to play despite the unbalanced results. And like I said, if you don't like the unbalanced results, just change the table or adjust the difficulty. The important thing is that you are having fun and that you still face those challenges, because otherwise it's not going to be exciting. That's what makes things so fun, when you actually overcome those situations. Just like I said, in real life, you feel sometimes a great fulfillment when you overcome problems and situations that at first seemed just impossible to surpass. I think that's a fair criticism of many role-playing games in current times, that I wouldn't consider them, or supplements or adventures, that I consider them to be lackluster because they want to create like an environment with no danger, with no risk. If there are no problems, then what are the player characters going to do if there is nothing to solve, no challenge to overcome? If they're just going to be moving about happy-go-lucky and the world is perfect, and it's not realistic. This world, the real life, is always going to have problems and issues. This life cannot exist without that duality. There is always light and darkness. There is always good and evil. It's part of our existence. It's delusional to think that suddenly there are going to be no problems. There's going to be like a perfect utopia. It's not real. It's just the way things are. So, well, thanks for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions on how to handle unbalanced encounters, please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.